I have a very good friend who, after graduating from medical school, inherited a substantial fortune from his parents. He had enough wealth to live extravagantly without working for the rest of his life. However, he didn't care for women or luxury. Instead, he was passionate about traveling and collecting bizarre stories from different places. Most of the time, he was not at home but on his travels. He didn't have other friends and was considered a peculiar person by others, but as it happened, I was a seeker of oddities. Therefore, whenever he encountered something strange, he would eagerly share his excitement of discovery with me. Just recently, I received a call from him. He had returned from his travels with many new and interesting stories. I immediately went to see him, as I was on my annual leave, and decided to move into his house. Every night, he would tell me one of these peculiar stories. Look, everyone's index finger represents human greed, as the desire to eat is the most basic and primal of human desires. Do you know why it's called the index finger? In Malaysia, the index finger signifies eating, and it twitches at the sight of delicious food. Let me tell you a story about the Malaysian index finger. He extinguished his cigarette and began to tell the tale. One day, while I was traveling in a small town in Malaysia, I stayed with a family. There, I met an elderly man who was in great spirits. We would chat, and it was from him that I learned this story. In the early 20th century, the village had a custom where girls had to have a slender figure to marry into a good family, especially a thin waist. Some families even had specific standards, down to the millimeter. The thinner the girl, the more beautiful she was considered, possibly because the locals despised pigs and thought that any form of fatness was abhorrent. Thus, the girls starved themselves in an effort to have a light, graceful figure. One girl, named Asia, stopped eating meat and even carbohydrates after realizing that her happiness in life was inversely proportional to her waistline. Yet, it seemed fate liked to play tricks on people. Despite exercising from dawn to dusk and eating only fruits, Asia kept gaining weight. Maybe, as we would say now, it was a genetic issue, or perhaps a disease. But at that time, no one thought that way. The other skinny girls mocked Asia behind her back. Her family also sighed in disappointment. Asia's figure kept getting bigger, to the point where not even the poorest family in town, the Hafiz family, would want her. Speaking of Hafiz, there was a distant kinship between his family and Asia's, but it was as insignificant as the countless hairs on one's head, shedding a few every day. However, Hafiz's son and Asia were childhood sweethearts, often playing together when they were young. But since Asia was determined to marry into a wealthy family, she cut ties with Hafiz's son. Nevertheless, he always held a place for her in his heart. With Asia's situation worsening, her parents became desperate to marry her off to avoid shame. Hafiz's son, Faris, was actually quite handsome, just poorly dressed but always clean. Asia's father mentioned the matter to Hafiz, and without a second thought, they agreed. The engagement was arranged in just one day, setting a record at that time. Asia, full of resentment, had no choice but to accept her fate. As no one else would have her, she settled into married life with Faris, who was very loving and obedient. Strangely, or perhaps due to her emotional state, Asia started to lose weight rapidly after marrying into the Hafiz family, eventually becoming a renowned beauty in the area. Unfortunately, she was already someone's wife. Still, many men coveted her. People in that area didn't care about first or second marriages, as a wife was merely seen as a tool for bearing children. Asia, now restless, insisted on not having children, which troubled Faris deeply. He knew that without children, he couldn't keep Asia by his side. But would having children even make a difference? Asia stopped doing household chores and spent her days chatting with friends, shopping, or visiting wealthy families, not at all like the wife of a poor family. It seemed that thinness was to blame, and Ferris knew that only if Asia became fat again would she settle down. Soon enough, Asia did start to gain weight, and everything seemed to return to how it was before. She became resentful of her fate, while Ferris secretly smiled, outwardly complaining alongside her and offering comfort. Life went on like the shuttle of a loom, weaving in and out. Years passed quickly. Asia had several children and gave up her dreams, living peacefully with Ferris until their daughter Yasmin grew up. Yasmin was incredibly beautiful, inheriting the best traits from her parents. However, she always remained neither too thin nor too fat, occasionally even a bit plump, which by current standards wasn't considered overweight. Asia, not wanting her daughter to suffer the same fate, began controlling Yasmin's diet early on, but to little effect. As Yasmin approached 16, her waist was still thicker than her peers. Anxious, Asia couldn't sleep. Seeing his wife with dark circles under her eyes, Ferris finally broke his silence, thinking the time had diluted everything. One night, as they lay in bed, unable to sleep, Ferris turned Asia towards him and revealed,
"Do you know why you suddenly lost weight when you came to our house? It was because of me. Although we're poor, my family knows a spell to make people thin. But it's considered witchcraft, and if used improperly, it can bring misfortune. I cast it on you when you arrived, and when you wanted to leave, I removed it so you gained weight again."
Ferris spoke somberly. Asia, no longer the age to get angry, had long suspected her sudden weight changes were due to her husband's intervention, but she was intrigued by the magical aspect.
It's all in the past, I don't blame you. But you can't delay Yasmin's future. I want her to marry well. Tell me how to do it.
It's the finger.
The finger? What do you mean?
Ferris told her that centuries ago, their ancestors, during a famine, kindly took in a beggar who was no ordinary man but a wandering wizard disguised as a beggar, testing people's kindness. Impressed by Ferris's ancestors' goodness, he taught them some spells, most of which were lost over generations, except for the thinning spell. However, Ferris's family began to decline, likely due to the numerous taboos associated with using witchcraft. Witchcraft has many prohibitions. Breaking them can lead to misfortune or even calamities affecting future generations. Ferris's ancestor must have misused the spells for ill-gotten gains. As for the spell, Ferris explained that simply swallowing one's index fingernail could make a person thin. However, the spell's effect was temporary and varied for each person. Overuse could lead to terrifying consequences. Since it was only for slimming, Ferris's family rarely used it, though his father had taught him. "No wonder you were always so eager to trim my nails," Asia said in a strange tone. Ferris, feeling a bit awkward, touched his wife's face.
"I did it because I love you."
Let's forget it. But you must cast the spell tomorrow and make Yasmin thin. Ferris agreed.
And they went back to sleep. Soon, Yasmin did lose weight, becoming the most beautiful and slender girl in town. The neighbors praised Ferris and Asia for raising such a wonderful daughter, sure to marry well. But a wealthy family in the area was looking for a bride for their son. This family was the one that measured brides' weights and waists down to the smallest unit. Asia encouraged Yasmin to try, but she was just a bit too heavy, even though she was already the lightest. The family announced that if no suitable bride was found within a week, they would look elsewhere. Desperate to marry her daughter into this family, Asia pressured Ferris to cast the spell again.
Ferris reluctantly warned, "If you want Yasmin to be thinner, the price isn't just a fingernail anymore.
Asia remained silent for a long time before insisting on going through with it. When Ferris asked Yasmin, she agreed, wanting to make her mother happy and lift the family out of poverty. This time, Yasmin had to eat her own index finger. The wealthy family didn't care about a missing finger, as long as the other criteria were met, explaining it away as an injury from childhood. So, Yasmin bravely cut off her index finger and swallowed it. The next day, she had indeed slimmed down noticeably. Once her hand healed, she visited the wealthy family, who were eagerly awaiting her. Overjoyed at her appearance, they quickly arranged the marriage. The matter of the finger seemed to be forgotten as time passed. Ferris and Asia, meanwhile, started living a more affluent life thanks to the wealthy family's support. Although Malaysia was turbulent with wars everywhere, their area remained a peaceful haven. Soon after, Yasmin, now married, became pregnant and gave birth to a son. But her body began to swell uncontrollably, like an inflating balloon. The husband's family, puzzled by her sudden weight gain, warned Ferris and Asia that if Yasmin continued to grow fatter, she could no longer maintain the status of their daughter-in-law and might be divorced. A distraught Asia asked Ferris for help. After much deliberation and consulting some books, Ferris realized that the heavy blood loss during childbirth could break the spell. He hadn't considered this, as Asia had already been fat during her childbirth, so the spell had not been in effect. At this point, seeing her daughter balloon in size, Asia tearfully reproached Ferris. Even if she returns to her original size, our Yasmin shouldn't have to suffer like this. Ferris told her that once a spell is broken, the body reacts violently, like a long compressed spring suddenly released. I don't care. If this continues, our family won't be able to stay here, and my grandson will be lost to us. Can you bear that? A distressed Ferris, looking at his weeping daughter and wife, finally said, "The spell can be cast one more time, but..." "No more buts. I'll do anything to save our daughter," Asia cried, begging Ferris, with Yasmin also pleading on her knees. "I don't know what the consequences will be. Our ancestors never used the spell repeatedly like this. They repeatedly warned that overuse of witchcraft would invite divine retribution. Maybe the wizard was just scaring you. You said no one ever used it like this. How would you know about retribution?" Asia argued back. Ferris fell silent, finally agreeing to cast the spell one last time. This time, it required the index fingers of both Ferris and Asia, as there is an invisible bond between parents and their children. Yasmin swallowed her parents' severed fingers. Ferris and Asia, enduring excruciating pain, settled their daughter to sleep. They stayed awake all night, fearing something terrible might happen, but everything seemed fine. The next morning, Yasmin had returned to her pre-marriage figure, looking as young as a maiden. Relieved, the couple sent Yasmin back to her husband's family, who were shocked but pleased with her transformation. Ferris and Asia went home to recover from their injuries. However, late the next night, they received devastating news. Yasmin had died suddenly, and her death was horrifying. Asia fainted upon hearing the news, and Ferris went alone to identify the body. In a daze, he walked into the scene, unable to accept his daughter's sudden death. But the sight of her body, almost skeleton-like as if gnawed by animals, with blood and flesh strewn across the 2-meter distance from her bed to the ground, was too much to bear. She had died in agony, trying to reach the door but only making it a few meters before succumbing. Ferris, sitting on the ground, wept bitterly, realizing this might be the retribution he feared. Yasmin's death, due to its gruesome nature and the strict reputation of the wealthy family, was kept secret. The official story was that the young lady had died of a sudden illness. The family gave Ferris and Asia a large sum of money to leave the area. Blaming herself for her daughter's tragic death, Asia later took her own life. Ferris disappeared from the world. The story suggests that witchcraft itself is a form of spirit manipulation and transference. For instance, a practitioner could transfer someone else's food or pain to themselves. It's likely that this slimming spell transferred the user's fat to someone else. All spells come with a price, and Ferris's repeated use of the spell finally brought retribution, tragically affecting his family. Yasmin's death was the backlash of the spell. Legend has it that there are tiny, ant-like hungry ghosts in hell. They were starved in life, and as ghosts, they consume everything. The index finger, symbolizing human appetite, forms a pact with these hungry ghosts. By eating their own index finger, the person effectively makes a deal with these spirits to devour the unwanted fat and flesh. However, if the pact becomes uncontrollable or is overused, the spirits will consume the person entirely.